My research study is the first research study to include SLPs in a mindfulness-based intervention for compassion fatigue symptoms. The minimal research that is out there is either A, not completed in the United States, so it isn't quite applicable, or the research was conducted before I was even born, so it's really kind of obsolete at this point.
Hey healthcare providers, you're listening to the Burnt Out to Lit Up podcast. Hosted by myself, Erica, and my husband, Michael, we're an OTPT team that understands the healthcare industry's got some serious issues.
Inspired by our own experience with burnout, we've made it our mission and passion to help you navigate your career in healthcare by cultivating wellness, growing both personally and professionally, and advocating for a better workplace.
Whether you are a clinician or manager, new grad or seasoned vet, join us each week as we share interviews, research, stories, and strategies that will give you the tools to go from burnt out to your most lit up self.
Let's dive in.
So I dare you throughout the day to be mindful of every time you sit up or stand up and sit down. And 9 out of 10 times you will forget to do it. Have you ever tried to do that, Mike?
No.
So my Headspace app is my meditation app, and it will sometimes at the end of a meditation, the narrator will challenge you to do that, to be mindful of every time you stand up and sit down. And I'm like, okay, that's so easy. That's embarrassing how easy it is. And I'll never remember to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn it. Like, if it's so easy, why can't I do it?
Is that a memory thing, not so much like a mindfulness thing?
Well,
because you don't think about sitting or standing.
Because it's very automatic, right? I mean, for most people, those motor, movements are very automatic. Don't take a lot of conscious effort, But the whole point of mindfulness is to have that non-judgmental presence throughout different moments of your life. So it was kind of like a mindfulness challenge, like how mindful can you be throughout those parts of your day. And, our guest today, Kate, we'll get into her intro in a second, but I love mindfulness. If you listened to the show before, you've heard me talk about how mindfulness played a role in my healing and recovery from burnout. And I don't want to talk about mindfulness too much here because that's what the show is about. But like on a personal level, a lot of people have asked me what helped you to recover from burnout. And burnout was something I experienced for like on and off, kind of going in and out of it for 2.5 years. And when I was in it, I was so detached from myself, and I would numb myself, and not with, thankfully I'm, grateful that I would numb myself with things that weren't so harmful to my health. Like I would just watch a lot of, Netflix, and I would go out on the weekends and try to do as much happy hours and try to fill my schedule as much as possible so I would not have to be bored or alone with myself. So I was super mindless during that time. I never checked in with myself. I never checked in to see what I wanted or what I needed, but I wanted to stay. I had a lot of FOMO, at that time too. So I wanted to be out and not have to sit with myself, and I wanted to go to the next new place. And, it could have been also the age I was in, the city I lived in. I lived in Miami, but I was also burned out, and I had like a fear of dealing with it. Like I didn't want to deal with those, my symptoms or deal with the thoughts I had. So I was mindless. And so when I started to, after I removed myself from that one of the jobs where I experienced very, pretty significant burnout, I started to little by little implement daily practices into my life. My mom had told me about meditation. My mom is pretty woo-woo. So every time I go over, there's, new crystals in the house. But I was like, whatever, this isn't me. Like, I'm not this type of person. And then I realized that, once I started to do it with Headspace, this is not sponsored by them. I wish it was. But I am a big fan of Headspace now for like over 3 years now. And I realized, oh my gosh, like what have I been doing with, I haven't been meditating. And now I realize that I had never given myself that space to be with myself and to calm and quiet my mind. And that's not to say that when you're meditating that you're quiet, because sometimes your mind, your activity and your thoughts can really ramp up, and that's okay, but it's about learning and developing the skill to observe yourself. I think also that's what mindfulness is. What are your experiences, Mike, with that? Because Mike started meditating with me a little bit last year. I know we kind of got off track, but
mindfulness is not something that I really do on a regular basis, I don't think, unless I'm actually just meditating. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not, they're kind of, those two things are together. I don't ever really throughout the day like sit and ponder the situation.
Or check in with yourself.
Yeah, no, and I guess I should, right? That's good, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's...
I think a really low stress job right now, though.
Yeah, but I think, mindfulness, whether... but that's how you perceive your job, So I think also mindfulness, whether you have a lot of stress or not, it's a psychological tool to keep in your toolkit to live well. And there's a million studies on it. And actually, Kate's doing something really cool. So I won't really go into it because she explains it. And it's easy to write off mindfulness, especially like if this is a newer concept to you. But mindfulness can help you be more in charge of everything in your life, like your habits. If you have habits that are productive and useful habits for you, and you want to keep strengthening those, or if you have habits that are not useful for you, being mindful of, what are your triggers in your environment. And you can make a lot of changes in your life once you're mindful of what that is. And, it can involve your friends and how you communicate with people in your life, people at work, being mindful of how you show up and your interactions with others and how you work, because there are so many benefits that mindfulness can have on your work performance and being a leader at work, and also what you will and will not tolerate. And this could be a lot of different things in your life, but the things in your life that you are allowing to happen for whatever reason, and you realize this is not something I want, whether it's setting boundaries with certain people or setting boundaries at work, and being, developing that awareness and being mindful of how you want to live your life. It's important to develop mindfulness. So with that being said, I want to introduce Catherine Sample Williams. She is a certified speech language pathologist from the American Speech Language Hearing Association and is licensed by the California Speech Language Pathologist and Audiology Board. She completed her bachelor's degree with honors in speech language pathology and audiology from California State University, Sacramento, and earned her master's degree in communication disorders and sciences from the University of Oregon. She interned in medical speech language pathology at Oregon Health Services University in Portland, Oregon, with a strong emphasis on swallow disorders and head and neck cancer. Kate's advanced clinical training includes certifications in LSVT for people with Parkinson's and fast forward for auditory processing. In 2012, Kate joined her father as partner in the family private practice. She has worked in a variety of clinical settings, including hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, educational settings, early intervention, and outpatient clinics with adults and pediatric clients. Kate believes in a strong interdisciplinary approach to make the necessary speech and language gains and is continually engaged in conducting and participating in research to further the field of both adult and pediatric speech and language impairments. She's currently pursuing her doctorate degree to study more about the relationship between compassion fatigue and speech pathologists. The research investigates the use of mindfulness strategies to reduce the negative effects of work-related stress. So Catherine is truly a pioneer in her field with this type of research, and I applaud her for all the work she's doing. This is a great episode. Disclaimer, we're both pretty nerdy with research. So that's just who we are. But before we move on to the episode, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to our show if you want to hear more of us and get the weekly or now bi-weekly reminders when a new episode comes out. Subscribe. And then also we ask if you can take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. Mike and I really appreciate that. It really helps out the show, and we can't say we appreciate you enough. So thank you. Happy listening.
Enjoy.
The Joy Energy Time Club is a members-only space for healthcare professionals that prioritize wellness, community, personal growth, and work well-being. One of our club members said something so special about us. She said, "Joy Energy Time has brought the light back into healthcare. It is bringing a community of change together, all while focusing on our well-being to put our best foot forward." In the club, you will find original content like downloads, guides, articles, interviews, and everything is so neatly categorized into different topics. You will also be able to connect with other healthcare professionals. You can ask questions, post anything, and it's very interactive. So that's what's really cool. It's half library and half community, and you can access the club through the Mighty Networks app on your phone or through desktop. The club is a special place for me because this is our movement to grow ourselves and work on reshaping the healthcare system from the bottom up. In light of what's been going on with the COVID-19 crisis, we wanted to make our club more accessible, which is why we are giving you your first 30 days completely free. You can join us by going to joyenergytime.com/club or visit the link in our show notes. Hi, Kate. Welcome to the Burnout to Live podcast. I'm excited to have you, my first SLP on the show.
Woo! Thank you so much, Erica, for having me. It's such a great opportunity.
And I love SLP. Some of my first friends at my first job, they were mostly like all SLPs, so I have much respect.
Oh, wonderful.
So can you share with us who you are, your background, how you got into SLP, and basically how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So I am a product of two SLPs. So my dad was my mom's clinical supervisor at the time, back in the day. And my mom's now a retired SLP, and my dad is now my business partner. So I grew up in my parents' private practice, and as a kid, I would help them with like filing and cleaning and, setting up clinic rooms. So it was very much a part of me. And now my dad and I co-own the business. And my dog Murphy, who is a certified therapy dog, is actually a part of the family business as well. But I never really was pressured into being in the profession as an SLP by my family. In college, I started out as an interior design major, and I purposely was choosing all different kinds of majors besides speech because I wanted to do my own thing. But then I took a couple classes in speech, and it was so fun, and I realized how much it really resonated with me, and I was hooked. So I've been a speech therapist for going on 9 years now. And fast forward to this year, I just completed my doctoral program in speech therapy, where I examined the effects of a mindfulness intervention on the symptoms of compassion fatigue among medical SLPs. And I'm also a certified compassion fatigue professional, a mindfulness practitioner, and a life coach. But I would say, one of the major takeaways from my experience with mindfulness and the research outcomes is having a really grounded relationship with myself or yourself is really important for a healthy and sustainable life.
Oh, wow. Wow. So that is so interesting. And by the way, I just realized that we have had an SLP before on the show, Julia from the Traveling Traveler. So I'm sorry. It's just been a long time since I had one.
Hi, Julia, fellow SLP.
SLP for life. I was like, oh, never mind. But anyway, yes. So that's really cool. So how did you get into what led you into your doctorate program and becoming so interested in mindfulness and compassion fatigue? Because usually, I mean, in my case, why I got so interested in burnout and all that was because, well, I experienced it. So like, what got you into that?
Yes. So I always joke that this topic picked me. I did not pick this topic. It came about probably a very similar way to how it came out for you. But, starting from kind of the beginning, it was really how I structured to set my life up to be. It was kind of this crash and burn setup, and I didn't really think twice about it. That's just kind of how my life was. So I was very goal oriented, and I would do everything I could to meet that goal, whether it was sacrificing my health or my wellness in the process, because it was like, as soon as I meet this goal, then I would be done making all of these different sacrifices. But in reality, the goals just kept coming, right? It was like, once I get done with grad school, check. My master's degree, check. My clinical fellow experience, check. My dream job, check. These goals just kept coming. And they were really like high peaks of satisfaction and accomplishment and success, but there were also these really low valleys of points of just doing everything in my power to get these goals completed. And I was basically just running on autopilot, and without really taking the time to check in with myself and have a conversation with myself about, is this really beneficial for me? Is this what I really want out of life? What are my values? Is this how I want to live? So as a result of being on autopilot, I never dig deeper and develop this total disconnect for what was happening in my life. And the lack of awareness led me down this path of burnout and fatigue. But it wasn't really until about halfway through my doctorate degree, another goal, of course, that I was setting for myself. But I was really in that middle part, I would say, halfway through my doctoral degree, I was faced with the fact that this research topic that I'd started doing was not going to be feasible. It wasn't going to be usable. And all this research that I had really constructed for the whole majority of my doctoral program was not going to be able to be used for my dissertation. So I was hit that, okay, what was I going to do? What was my topic going to be? I became really depressed. I had all these negative thoughts that flooded inside my brain. I was lacking the energy to support my clients at that time. I was feeling super isolated, that I was the only one experiencing this. It was like this big dark cloud. And through mindfulness, it really helped me build that relationship with myself, because it helps bring you out of autopilot and bring those subconscious and unconscious elements through in your life to light and to the conscious mind. And that's what I started doing. And as a researcher, I went to the research to look for answers. Okay, I'm feeling like this. Why am I feeling like this? And not only did I find that it has a name, compassion fatigue and burnout, I also found, wow, there's like an epidemic in this healthcare system of people experiencing this. And this really opened my mind to the prevalence of how great this issue is. And I wanted to be a part in doing something. And so it started out to be something for myself. And as I used these tools and as they continued to work, I said, hey, what if I made this into my research study? And so then it became that.
Oh, wow. Basically, you got to this point where you were experiencing these symptoms and you were isolated and depressed, and you let that guide you into this topic, and then you realize, like this is more than just me. Like so many others are experiencing this. And by the way, like in my research of burnout and everything I've prepared for like the courses I've taught, I have found seldomly have found research looking at SLPs and like OTs and PTs in terms of burnout and compassion fatigue. So like I feel like you're feeling in a very necessary void, because there's just a lack out there as it is right now.
Well, thank you. And I totally agree with you. It's really interesting how little there is on the topic. And my research study is the first research study to include SLPs in a mindfulness-based intervention for compassion fatigue symptoms. All previous studies have looked at SLP students, but not SLPs in the work setting. And the minimal research that is out there is either not completed in the United States, so it isn't quite applicable to our situation and settings, or the research is, was conducted before I was even born, so it's really kind of obsolete at this point too. So there is definitely a need for more research. I agree.
Yeah, I came across one study, you may have come across this one as well, looking at speech, like SLPs in Iran. It was 90, and I have like random facts in my head. So it was 97% of Iranian speech language pathologists were burned out. I'm like, well, I can't really like translate that to like the research I'm preparing for U.S. Healthcare professionals. So it was kind of like, you're right. It's other countries or like in the 80s or 70s, and it's like not that relevant.
Right. So much has changed in how healthcare is conducted since the 80s that it's very obsolete.
Right. And I want to ask you, in terms of like, what you were experiencing and the research you're doing examining compassion fatigue with other SLPs, have you found that within the profession of speech language pathology, in your experience, do you find that there are a lot of people that have very like similar personalities to you and that are very goal oriented, and or do you also notice that there's a lot of pressures in your field to like achieve a certain amount of XYZ? Because I feel like every profession has their own unique expectations, but also there could be different sorts of like people with personalities and all these things that kind of mix together. And I would just love to hear your experience with that.
Yes, so there are specific professional and personal risk factors that's noted in the research that make us as speech therapists particularly susceptible to burnout. So professionally, we are typically the only SLP on staff or in the building, and then we're performing all of our job-related tasks, either all by ourselves or on our own. And additionally, we might receive a lack of support, a perceived lack of support from coworkers, because they just might not understand what an SLP does and what our role really is. So these feelings of isolation, loneliness, and this perceived lack of support from coworkers really do place us at higher risk. Mm-hmm. But personality-wise, SLPs, we aren't generally known for our super easy breezy personality. We're typically known for our type A behavior and our perfectionist qualities, right? And by the way, I understand that's a very gross generalization, but I'm only reporting on what's been documented in the research. And we have found that SLPs have a higher instances of these type A personalities, and that type A personalities are correlated with a higher perceived stress.
Yes, I've also come across that in research, and from working with so many SLPs, I love them all, but I have noticed that type A is like it's turned up a little bit compared to OT, just like in my experiences. And, before we move forward, I want to share this experience, because I don't know if this is a very unique, isolated case, or if this is something that's more prevalent. I'm not sure. But one of my close friends is an SLP, and she was doing one of her, I don't know what you call like field work or internships or externships. She was doing one of those, and she came home crying one day because she was told that, but she had to, come in wearing business casual, and she was wearing all the right clothes, but she was told that she needs to wear name brand clothes, to name brand like ballet flats and name brand, everything. And then her mom like bought her all these like name brand clothes and whatnot. So it's, and it was this image of upholding an image type of thing. And it could have been very specific to that one clinic, because I've never heard of because we're in, as, because it was outpatient. I'm not in, it could be like the city that we lived in, like, I'm not sure. But have you ever come across something like that?
That seems like a pretty extreme case. And I have heard similar horror stories of just the expectations of what an SLP student or someone in their clinical fellowship year is expected to do. And the research does support that SLP students typically will have or create some of these type A personality behavior traits in school, and then they follow them where after they graduate, these symptoms or these qualities exacerbate as you work. So I think it's cultivated, this kind of thing is cultivated in our internship, in our schooling, and then we take those because that's all we really know and what we're grounded in, from our learning, and then we take it sometimes to an unhealthy level. But it sounds like, some people do experience unhealthy levels of this during grad school as well.
Yes. And I know there's so many horror stories across tons of different healthcare professionals I've talked to about so many different things. But, I want to go back to your story and communicating and the things that we're going to hone in on. And I know that you hit these lows as an SLP, and you attribute that also to not having like strong communication skills with yourself. So, as an SLP, we think of SLPs as like, master communicators. But, in your experience, what was it that you noticed that was like, that was disconnected, that you were somehow disconnected with yourself and you weren't having the best communication with yourself during that time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because SLPs, we are considered the communication experts, so to speak, right? But rarely do we check in with how we communicate with ourselves. We're always looking at how other people communicate, how other people express themselves, but we really don't take that time to flip roles and do that on ourselves. So this self-communication is really a tool for empowering yourself. During those times when I was experiencing that burnout, I felt desperate that I needed some kind of hero to save me from this mess, and that, that I needed someone to save me. But this strong relationship that I built with myself, the greater and stronger that relationship got, the more I realized that I was in control of my situation and I had the power to change it, and that I was that hero, and that somebody to save me was me, but I needed to take the time to do that internal work through mindfulness.
Great. And you talk about compassion fatigue, and that is often very much confused with burnout. They're not exactly the same thing. But why? Well, first of all, what is compassion fatigue? And then, you alluded to like these different things, and especially like not recognizing that you needed to save yourself. Like, what was your an experience that you had that really stands out to you, where like you had you really were in that compassion fatigue?
Yeah, so I feel like we could have a whole episode on just compassion fatigue and its definition.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think you had an episode with, I think it was Lisa.
Yes.
I want to say it was around episode 64 or something like that, where she had talked about compassion fatigue, and she did a nice job of defining that. My experience of digging through all the research is that the definitions are really not consistent across or even with disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of my theories is I believe that this inconsistency with defining what occupational induced stress really is a contributing factor as to why it's hard to get administration on board, or just healthcare related fields on board with understanding the severity of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
and the significant impact it has on the professionals and then the care we provide. This lack of consistency with the definition is impacting kind of our forward momentum for this change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I know also because I'm in the process of writing my book, and same kind of thing with burnout in terms of like it now has been more solidified, but I can imagine that, there's still, other researchers point to like gray areas in burnout, but and especially like burnout and depression, and like a distinction between the two and whatnot. But as far as compassion fatigue in how it's been defined, or at least how you are like approaching it or defining it in your research, like what does that look like?
Yeah, so I found the best operational definition for compassion fatigue is described by Stam in her research. I find that to be the most straightforward and kind of tangible information. So she describes compassion fatigue as basically like this umbrella term of occupational based stress. And below that are positive and negative effects of compassion fatigue. The positive effects being compassion satisfaction, and then the negative effects being burnout and secondary traumatic stress.
Okay. Because burnout, for example, it develops in response to chronic work stressors, but I know, at least from what I've read, that compassion fatigue can be more on sudden. Like, is that correct?
It depends on who's defining it. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It can. I've also seen them in the literature being, used interchangeably. And I've also seen compassion fatigue being used interchangeably with secondary traumatic stress as well.
Oh, okay. So it's a little hairy for you because you're like pretty much pioneering a lot of this research, like for SLPs.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you are too. I think we should have more conversations on the topic. I'd love to get some, pick your brain about it.
Yeah, well, for those of you listening, Kate and I are going to take this off air soon. But yes, there's a lot. And yes, you're right. Lisa Labrie did talk a lot about the compassion fatigue. For those of you that want to go back, she's a nurse, and you probably remember it better than I do, like episode 60-ish something sounds about right. But yeah, so in terms of you hit upon compassion satisfaction, and that's like a positive experience from compassion fatigue. So what is that?
It's basically how the positive perceptions of working with people. So you can have compassion fatigue. You can have this stress at work, but if we look at stress, there's positive and negative qualities about stress. And so that's basically highlighting the positive outcomes of having compassion fatigue.
Okay. I didn't know that there could be, or that, there's been positive outcomes related to it. But that's interesting to know. Like gaining the satisfaction of knowing you're doing important work, working with patients. But as far as like the negative ones, like secondary traumatic stress and burnout, like, for example, what was your, like, I know you talked about your dark places, but did you have any more low points in terms of your own personal experience with it?
Well, I mean, I would say that it would happen after each goal that I had in my life. So I would go through these roller coasters of emotions of burnout, and then I'd feel okay once I met that goal. And then I'd get the next goal, and I wouldn't feel okay. And I realized it started to become a pattern. And even if I tried to change environments, so I went from one healthcare setting to another, and I thought, oh, if I just change environments, I'm gonna be good. And this honeymoon phase would happen where I'd get re-energized and I would be so excited and meet new people and new experiences. But as soon as that faded away, I was still left with these same feelings of depression, negative self-talk, lack of energy. So I couldn't figure out what it was, and I needed to break that pattern and that cycle. And I think over time, the cycle continued, but it got exponentially more severe, where it was like to the point of slapping me in the face, like, hey, you gotta do something about this.
Yeah, so like it worsened over time. And for those listening that think they might have compassion fatigue or burnout, or like somewhere along that continuum, what are some red flags that people can start to think about and see if this is something that like they are experiencing or like they may be experiencing?
Yeah, signs and symptoms can occur on, like you said, a continuum, and they can be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, interpersonal, cognitive impacts across the board. And it can be hard to differentiate because some of the symptoms can be attributed to other things as well. So if you're insomnia, lack of sleep is a big indicator. GI issues, headaches, those are some of the physical things. Any just callousness, or as my husband calls it, if you're getting a little salty, that's kind of a red flag.
I laugh because Mike says the same thing about me.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So if you're feeling a little salty, that might be something to just explore a little further as to why you're feeling that way. But if you're dreading to go into work, why are you dreading to go into work? What is that? So just really, if you're having any kind of resistance or blockage related to work too, that it's just, those are little things telling you to dig a little deeper onto why that is.
Mm-hmm. And you made a really interesting point. So I was talking to someone else about like that honeymoon phase with new jobs, and a lot of this person like started travel therapy, and it was like always a honeymoon type of thing. And I think that's what my husband kind of likes too, because it's like, but he's been taking longer contracts, so that kind of wears down. But in terms of like that, that's when it could be more of a personal problem that needs to be addressed, because despite the setting you're in, you're repeating that cycle. So it's something to do with the way you perceive the world, the way you show up to work, or the way you relate to yourself, right? Like these are the things that need to be fixed. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. I think that I think of burnout or compassion fatigue remediation as like a pie. And there's different pieces of the pie that make up the whole pie, or make up a whole approach to remediating burnout. And one of them is the facility and organization. One of these is this interpersonal, with how you relate to other people. And the third piece of the pie is that the third piece of that pie is the intrapersonal piece.
Right.
So doing that self-exploration.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's burnout. The causes of it, we know, are deeply stemmed in the organization. And that's definitely something that is relevant in healthcare. And I also know, and you know from your research, that there can be different personality types, which we've talked about. And I can relate to the type A because I'm very much like that as well. And what helped me become a better person after I experienced burnout, because when I was experiencing burnout, I was very disconnected with myself and very not in tune with myself. But like mindfulness was something that really helped me to, like, now I know the thing is, a lot of people listening are maybe so like, what do I want to say? Like mindfulness it's just so all over the place now. And whereas maybe 10 years ago, like no one knew what it was, but I can literally say like it has helped me so much. So how can mindfulness play a role in reducing the negative effects of work-related stress? Like, why is it actually helpful?
That is a really great question. And I am a very logical person, logically minded. And I love research. So I'm like, if you can't show me how this works with this, I don't know if I want to try that. Or, I need to have proof in the pudding, so to speak. And basically what mindfulness is, it's this act of being aware of the present moment non-judgmentally. So the key components here is awareness, presence, and non-judgment. And this is a simple concept, but it's not necessarily simple in execution. So your question was, how can mindfulness play a role with reducing the negative effects of work-related stress? Well, being a researcher, I went to go see the research and check it out, and it's shown that it can have a positive impact on what we were just talking about, this intrapersonal, interpersonal, and organizational levels of healthcare. So for the healthcare professional, mindfulness research demonstrates that there's a reduction in the healthcare provider's overall perceived stress, as well as depression and anxiety symptoms, and an improvement in the professional's quality of life. And then in terms of interpersonal effects, mindfulness has been reported to show improvements with patient care, reduced amount of medical errors, improved safety compliance, and fewer patient-related injuries. And as a secondary gain from mindfulness interventions, I didn't say that clearly. What did I say? A secondary gain, thanks. A secondary gain from mindfulness interventions for healthcare providers is that this in turn improves the healthcare system operations. So you have less attrition in staff, reduced number of sick days used, or reduced number of unplanned early retirements. And this results in saving facilities money. And the bottom line for most facilities is money, right? So if you have somebody who has compassion fatigue, they will spend millions, facilities might spend up to millions trying to compensate for this. But with mindfulness interventions, it has shown that everybody at each level of this, every piece of the pie, benefits.
Wow. And I love how, I like talking about like different tools in the toolkit, and mindfulness is definitely something that can impact not just you. And it's not like a selfish thing, because like you just pointed out, mindfulness impacts your patient care, it impacts organizations, even the bottom line, like you can tie it back there. And that's why like I'm obsessed with all the mindfulness studies looking at healthcare professionals, because like it has been measured to have all these significant outcomes. And it's something that especially I feel like non-healthcare organizations are very much on board with this. Like, big tech companies like Google and like all those places, like they have meditation spaces and they're really ahead of the game. But I feel like in healthcare, we're pretty lagging in that area.
Yeah, we're just now scratching the surface of how beneficial this approach really can be for everybody involved. It's a win-win. And the more that I research and look at mindfulness and how it impacts healthcare professionals, the more I'm like, we need this everywhere. We need to get this message out, because it's so beneficial.
And I think that there's also, I've seen online like some negative press, if you will, for mindfulness, like, oh, it can't cure burnout. And I don't think one thing can totally wipe burnout out, but it's like the implementation of all these different tools and strategies together at different levels of organization, interpersonal, systematic, that need to happen. And mindfulness, like I said, is one part of that. It's like one tool of that toolkit. And I think for anyone out there that like, because I'm always like preparing myself for like someone to say, oh, well, mindfulness can't cure burnout, but like what it can do is all these things shown in research that have like all these strong benefits for you and your team. And actually, I came across this really cool study about mindfulness done within a team. Like a healthcare team did mindfulness huddles, like mini mindfulness huddles. And then it showed like the outcome of that 6-week study was that it improved their interpersonal and intrapersonal. So it impacted people, at each level. And it also helped the team be better in all these different areas. So I really like how it can be done as a team. It doesn't just have to be done like in this long seated meditation at home for an hour,
Right. And also, I love that research is exploring different avenues for healthcare providers, specifically because these traditional mindfulness meditation approaches are just not feasible. We have too much on our plate. The attrition is always very high if healthcare providers are involved in any kind of mindfulness activities. So the research is showing even as small as 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation or just checking in with yourself has a dramatic impact on yourself and the outcomes. So, and that's a big thing too. It doesn't have to be this big labored, oh, I have to carve out all this time. Oh, I have to find, sit in this quiet little place. My head is spinning. This are all the things that I need to do. No, you can really streamline this to tailor it to fit your needs and have it have a big bang for your buck, so to speak, as well.
Mm-hmm. So what are some strategies that our listeners can take with them to implement mindfulness that you have found, whether it's on their own or whether it's with others, or like just what are some quick wins or some things that people can start practicing?
Yes. So the most mindfulness strategies incorporate the ABCs of mindfulness. So ABCs, going back to the definition of mindfulness, A stands for awareness. So how to become more aware of what you're thinking and doing and what's going on inside your mind and your body. B stands for be still or be present. So hang out with the experience. Avoid trying to respond in an autopilot way or feed the problem by creating a story around it. And C stands for C, spelled SEE, where you can choose to see the situation from another's perspective or see it from a place of non-judgment. So these are basically the foundations for any kind of mindfulness strategy. The mindfulness ABCs.
I love the ABCs.
Right? I always love a good acronym. And actually, speaking of acronyms, so your first challenge is to stop. STOP.
Love it.
And so S for stop stands for stop what you're doing and pause. The T stands for take a breath, connect with your breath, because your breath is the anchor to any present moment of what's going on. And O is to observe. So notice what's happening inside you or outside of you or around you. And P stands for perceive. So then continue on what you're doing. So the stop challenge helps you to build awareness. You don't necessarily have to, quote unquote, fix anything at this point, but you're just seeing how you respond and what's going on. So if you find yourself being triggered at work, I challenge you to use the stop method. When you go down to sit down at your computer to chart, stop. And I mean stop in the way of stop what you're doing, take a breath, observe, and then proceed and see what's going on with you inside your body.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
And if you think this is easy, it's not, because so I meditate with Headspace, and they always have a challenge to next time you stand up and sit down or go from sit to stand or whatever, just be mindful of it. And you think that's so easy, like what a stupid assignment, but I've never remembered to do it. So right. It's like, it is very challenging, and I think that's a great place to start with that. Like the next time you sit down to chart, stop and do that every day. And it's okay, because you will forget. I mean, at least I have forgotten, and I'm I've been meditating for 2 years and I do mindfulness all the time, but it's just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy.
That is a beautiful quote that sums up mindfulness exactly. I would even I currently still have little alarms in my phone to check in with myself throughout the day. So I still need that, and I've been meditating for years. But also what I can do is I can send you a handout to give to your listeners on this, so they can have some kind of visual to help, remind themselves to use the strategy either at work or at home. I can send that to you.
Absolutely. And we'll have that linked in the show notes and episode notes too, so people can get their hands on that. And that's awesome. Do you have any last words for people listening where they think that, like, I'm so stressed, or I'm having such a tough time. Like, how can a little mindfulness help me? Like, I guess people that are feeling a little hopeless, or maybe just kind of, what's the word? Like, cynical about it. Like, any last words of how this sort of practice that's simple but not easy can impact people's lives?
Yes, if you're having any doubts or concerns or just no direction on where to go in terms of mindfulness, start small, and it's so easy to put it into your daily activities. So you wash your hands at work, right? So if you just think about taking a couple deep breaths every time you wash your hands at work, you're already starting to integrate it. It does not have to be big. You don't have to go big or go home. Keep it small, because over time, that's what's going to build into your routine, are these small mindfulness habits. And like you had mentioned, the Headspace app, there's so many great apps, or YouTube, that have these tiny, couple minute meditations. Start there. It would be my suggestion.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Oh, well, I was going to say, and also after this week, after this episode airs, I'll be launching a week-long mindfulness challenge on my Instagram account at Santa Rosa Speech Therapy. So follow me there, and I'll be announcing a prize to who completes the challenge. And yeah, it's an opportunity to win something, but it's also your way to start practicing some of these techniques you've learned in this episode, and an opportunity to kind of dip your toe into mindfulness while having a network of support to help you through that process.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, this sounds so amazing that I don't see why not our listeners wouldn't join. And everything will be included in the show notes. I always like to say that because sometimes people are driving, and I've always tried to memorize things, and I get frustrated when I can't find something in someone else's podcast show notes. So the type A in us, right?
Right.
So thank you again so much, Kate, for sharing your experiences. I've loved having you on, and having your insight and your research, like I said, is so important. Where else can people find you and connect with you?
So if you're interested in learning more about my research and what I do on the topic of compassion fatigue and mindfulness, you can find me on the web at sustainablespeech.com, or follow me on Instagram at Santa Rosa Speech Therapy.
Awesome. And one final question that we always ask our guests, what makes you your most lit up self?
To be my most lit up self would to be my most authentic self. So living true to who I am lights me up the most.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Erica.